So as we begin to work with our emissions data, one of the things we'll note is that we have the country name, but not the region name. We need both of those because we'll want to do some summaries of the greenhouse gas emissions by geographical region. Now we know that that data is contained here on the Regions Worksheet tab. So what we'll want to do is to look for the country name on this worksheet tab and bring back the region name and copy it into our emissions worksheet tab. So the way you can do that in a spreadsheet is to use the V or vertical lookup function. So here's what that looks like. So we put the equal sign in, vlookup, which is the formula or the formula name, parenthesis, and now Google Sheets is prompting us for the arguments we will need for this formula. The first one is the search key. In other words, what are we looking for in the data range? In this case, it is the country name, so we just click on that to get the cell reference. Press a comma to get to the next argument, and we can see what it's looking for now is the range of data we're looking for. That is on a different worksheet tab, so let's click on Regions. Okay, a range of data we're looking for includes the value we're searching for, in this case Afghanistan, and the value we want to bring back, region name. So we'll want to click and highlight the three columns where that information is contained, and then we want to press Shift and down to get all of the different countries and their regions. Now there's a lot of these, so we could just scroll down all the way, or we can use a shortcut key or set of shortcut keys, which can get us all the way to the bottom of this range of data fairly quickly. Here's how that works. You're already pressing the Shift key because you want to highlight the cells and the range of data, but now I want you to press either the Control key if you're on a Windows machine or the Command key if you're on a Mac. Now press the down arrow. We can see that the cursor has taken us automatically to the bottom of the continuous range of data, which is exactly what we want. Okay, now that we've highlighted all of this data efficiently, we can press the comma to get to the next argument, and now it says index. What index refers to is the number of the column that we want to look for the value we want to bring back. So since we have three columns, we want to bring back the value in the third column, so what we put in here is 3. The final argument is whether or not we want to bring back an exact match or an approximate match based on sorted data. In this case, we want an exact match, so what you put into this argument is the word false. That's the end of the formula, so we end with parenthesis, and when you press enter, it brings back exactly what we want, which is the region for Afghanistan, which is, of course, Asia. Now, we want to copy and paste this down through all of the rows of data we have, and there are a lot of them, so we don't want to do this manually either. But the first thing we need to note is that when you put in a formula, if you're going to copy and paste it, it's going to change the cell reference. And while we want to do that for country name, we don't want to do that for the range of data we're interested in. So the way to keep that from changing is to use a $sign in front of the columns and or the rows of the data that you want to keep static. Now there's another way to do this quickly rather than just manually entering $signs, and actually that is using the F4 key on your keyboard. And that shifts the $signs around so that you can keep static either the row or the column or both. And so in our case, we want both of them to be static. So we can press the F4 key until we see everything has the $sign in front of it. So now we can copy this, and this data range will not change, which is what we want. But note here there are many, many rows in this, and so we don't want to copy and paste this manually if we don't have to. So we can use a similar set of shortcut keys to do that. The problem is if we press the Shift, Control, or Command and down arrow here, there's no data to actually look for or search for. And so what the spreadsheet will do was copy it to the very bottom row of the spreadsheet. Instead, we want only to copy it to the bottom of the row of the data we have, which is country. So the way to do that is like this. First, press the Control C to copy that region of the formula in the region column. Now, just move your cursor over to the country column, and in this case, you can press Control or Command and down arrow without the shift, and that will take you to the bottom of the row of data in country. Now shift back to the region column. Now you can press the Shift key, Control or Command, and up arrow. That will take us to where the data begins in this column, which is what we just entered for the vlookup function. Press Control V to paste, and that will paste all that formula through all 36,691 rows that we have. Okay, so now we have country and region. We're ready to begin summarizing and visualizing this data.
First, we'll be looking at the annual trends. So in these first set of questions, we're going to be evaluating the global rate of change in greenhouse gas emissions and determining when emissions were highest and why this must be. So I'm going to pass it off to Tanner so we can find out how to work with the data provided in our Excel sheets.
Congratulations. You have mastered the vlookup function, and we were able to add a region column to our emissions tab. The hard part is over. It's now time to start summarizing and visualizing our data, which is the fun part, I would have to say. So in order to do that, we're going to use a really helpful tool called Pivot Table. What Pivot Table does is it summarizes our data in ways that we ask it to. So currently our data is in column form. We have all these columns in front of us. And we're going to start summing by year, and eventually start parsing out by sector or by region. But step one will be to look at annual trends in greenhouse gas emissions, just overall. So in order to do that, we're gonna put our cursor in cell A1 in the emissions tab. Then we're gonna say Insert Pivot Table. We do indeed want to create a new sheet. I'm going to entitle this pivot table Annual Trends. And I'm going to direct your attention to this pivot table editor on the right side. So for visualizing our data, and we want to look at annual trends, on the x-axis, you're going to have year because you're looking at, changes over time. Usually in a time series, you have year on the x-axis, and on the y-axis is going to be what's changing. And in this case, it's greenhouse gas emissions or carbon dioxide equivalents. So rows typically for your pivot table, you're going to want rows on the x-axis. So I'm going to put year, add row to year. Beautiful. I'm going to skip the columns for now, and then I'm going to go to values, go add CO2 equivalents. And the pivot table summed CO2 equivalents per year. Love it. Now we're going to visualize this. So we're going to highlight our data, insert a chart, I'm making one adjustment to my data set. You'll notice at the bottom, it gives us a grand total, and that's kind of screwing things up. Grand total is in A32 and B32. So I'm going to say A1 through B31 in my data range. Okay. So that's our annual trends over the years. And you can give a title to your figure. You can, you know, maybe change the title of your axes. You definitely want to include units here. So I'll let you go ahead and play around with the figure that you just made and refer to the questions regarding the annual trends.
Next, we'll be looking at the regional differences in greenhouse gas emissions. Comparing and contrasting regions from all over the world and using our data to infer why some regions may have a lower or higher emission rate than others. And keeping these questions in mind, I'm going to pass it back off to Tanner to further explain some information on how to create pivot tables to get a better visual representation of our data that we do have.
Now that we have visualized the annual trends of greenhouse gas emissions, next we want to look at regional differences in greenhouse gas emissions over time. So we're going to create another pivot table. Once again, I'm back to my emissions tab, cell A1, insert pivot table. New sheet. Yep, sounds good. And I'll entitle this regional trends. So take a look at your pivot table editor. We're still looking at trends over time. So let's go year. We're still looking at CO2 equivalents. But we're parsing by region. So here under columns, I'm gonna input region. Now we have a breakdown of CO2 emissions per year in each region. Excellent. So we have that summarized in our pivot table. Now let's create a figure to visualize it. I'm going to highlight my data. Insert chart. Once again, we have the grand totals included. Let's go ahead and omit the grand totals. Or I guess we don't have to. We can look at this here, but if you just want to zone in on, oh yeah, okay. I'm just going to click grand total remove over here under the series. Now we can get a better visualization of the regions. Once again, you can alter your axes, change your title, kind of play around with visualizing this data and answer your questions about regional trends in greenhouse gas emissions.
And lastly, we will be looking at the sectoral differences in our emissions, thinking about why certain sectors may have lower emission rate than others. And over this past semester, we have learned about many of the inner workings of different sectors. And we just want to know, what sectors are you most interested in and how you could contribute to them through your work in NREM. And that is all the questions that we have for this lab. So as always, if you have any additional questions on how to answer these or explaining the video in further detail, do not hesitate to reach out to any of the teaching team members and send us an email. Mahalo.
Our final task is to look at sectoral differences in greenhouse gas emissions. So we're going to be focusing in on column F, which lists different industry sectors. So you're probably professionals at making pivot tables by now. Once again, I am placing my cursor in cell A1, insert pivot table in a new sheet. Sectoral trends. We're still looking at trends over time. So once again, we'll input year for rows. We're still looking at CO2 equivalents for our values. And rather than parsing out per region, we're parsing out per sector. So item parentheses sector is the title of that column in our emissions tab. And we now have a summary of CO2 equivalents per year in each industry sector. Now let's visualize our data. I'm going to highlight the data set. I'm going to insert a chart. I'm going to delete the grand total to change the y-axis a little bit. And there we have sectoral trends in greenhouse gas emissions. We can give a new title and adjust our figure as we please, and then go ahead and answer questions regarding sectoral differences in greenhouse gas emissions. If you have any questions on this data exploration, feel free to reach out to a member of the teaching team and have fun.